Captain Jake Morrison sat in his worn captain's chair, staring at the emergency message that had just arrived on his ship's communication screen. The words made his stomach turn cold. Another world had fallen to the Zereth Empire. This time it was the Tau Ceti system, home to nearly 50 million people across 3 planets. The message was short and terrifying. The Zereth fleet had arrived without warning. Within 6 hours, every defense station went silent. Every warship stopped moving. Every weapon stopped firing. The planets surrendered before the sun set on their capital cities. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and looked around the small bridge of his cargo ship. The new dawn. His crew was gathered around him, all of them reading the same horrible news. Pete Collins, his old friend and the ship's engineer, shook his head slowly. Lisa Carter, their navigator, had her hands pressed to her mouth. Amy Rodriguez, who handled their communications, was already pulling up more news reports. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "there are more messages coming in. The news networks are calling this the fastest conquest in galactic history." Jake nodded and stood up from his chair. The New Dawn was not a warship. It was a simple cargo vessel, 30 years old and showing its age. Right now, they were carrying medical supplies to the outer colonies. They had food, medicine, and basic equipment that frontier worlds desperately needed. It was honest work, but it felt small and meaningless when entire civilizations were falling to an enemy no one understood. "Show me the footage," Jake said. Amy's fingers moved across her control panel. The main screen flickered and showed images from the Tau Ceti system. Jake had seen these kinds of reports before, but they never got easier to watch. The Zereth ships looked like nothing he had ever seen. They were massive, bigger than Earth's largest space stations. Their hulls seemed to bend light around them, making them hard to look at directly, but the strangest part was what happened when they arrived. In every system they attacked, the same thing occurred. The moment the Zereth ships appeared, all advanced technology simply stopped working. Power plants went dark. Computer systems crashed. Spacecraft drifted helplessly as their engines died. "Look at this part," Lisa said, pointing at the screen. The defense fleet had over 200 ships. "Watch what happens when the Zereth arrive." Jake watched as the human warships suddenly went dark. One moment they were moving in formation, weapons charged and ready to fight. The next moment they were floating dead in space like abandoned hulks, no explosions, no weapon fire. The ships just stopped working. On the planets below, the same thing happened. City lights went out sector by sector. Transportation networks collapsed. Even simple devices like radios and computers stopped functioning. Within hours, entire worlds were thrown back to pre-industrial conditions. "How do they do it?" Pete asked. "I've been working with starship engines for 20 years. I've never seen anything that could just turn off technology like that." Jake had been wondering the same thing. The Zereth had been conquering worlds for almost 2 years now. They had taken dozens of systems, millions of lives, countless resources, but no one understood how their weapons worked. The few survivors who escaped the conquered worlds all told the same story. The Zereth ships arrived, everything stopped working, and resistance became impossible. "The reports say they don't even fight," Amy said, reading from her screen. "They just show up and broadcast surrender demands. When all the weapons stop working and the life support systems start failing, people give up rather than die." Jake walked to the front of the bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Zereth Empire was growing larger every day. They were taking worlds without effort, adding new systems to their territory faster than anyone could keep track of, and no one seemed able to stop them. "Captain," Lisa said, "we're getting new orders." Jake turned back to his crew. "What kind of orders?" "Emergency evacuation duty. We're being sent to Haven Colony. Intelligence reports suggest the Zereth fleet is heading in that direction next." Haven Colony was one of humanity's newer settlements, about 15 years old. It had grown quickly, with nearly 8 million people spread across the main planet and several space stations. It was also directly in the path the Zereth seemed to be taking as they moved through human space. "How much time do we have?" Jake asked, Lisa checked her navigation computer. If we leave now and push the engines hard, we can reach Haven Colony in 4 days. But according to these projections, the Zereth fleet could arrive there in less than a week. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The New Dawn could carry about 500 evacuees if they packed them in tight and used the cargo bays. With 8 million people on Haven Colony, it would take thousands of ships to evacuate everyone. Even if every available vessel in the sector helped, they would not be able to save them all. Pete, how are our engines? Jake asked. The engineer checked his readings. Running fine, Captain. We can make the trip without any problems. Though, I've been getting some strange readings from our power systems lately. Strange how? Pete frowned at his control panel. Nothing serious? Just some fluctuations in the power grid? Probably just sensor drift. This old girl isn't exactly new anymore. Jake nodded. The New Dawn had been built during humanity's early expansion period, when ships needed to be tough and reliable rather than fast or sophisticated. Most newer vessels had advanced computer systems, quantum processors, and gravitic drives that could push them faster than light with incredible efficiency. The New Dawn still used fusion engines and basic electronics that were considered outdated by modern standards, but the old ship had served them well. It was sturdy, dependable, and easy to repair. Jake had been captain of the New Dawn for 8 years, and in that time they had never failed to complete a mission. Set course for Haven Colony, Jake ordered, maximum speed. As the ship's engines came to life and they began their journey, Jake could not shake the feeling that they were racing against time. The Zereth Empire was spreading across the galaxy like a plague, and so far no one had found a way to fight back. Every world that fell made them stronger, gave them more resources, more people to control. The worst part was the helplessness. When the Zereth arrived, resistance was not just difficult, it was impossible. How could you fight an enemy that could turn off your weapons just by being near them? How could you defend a planet when your entire technological civilization could be shut down in minutes? Jake looked around at his crew again. Pete was running diagnostics on their systems, making sure everything was working properly for the long journey ahead. Lisa was plotting their course, calculating jump points and fuel consumption. Amy was monitoring communication channels, listening for any new information about the Zereth advance. They were good people, experienced spacers who had seen their share of danger, but Jake wondered if any of them really understood what they were flying toward. Haven Colony would be in chaos when they arrived. Millions of terrified people trying to escape before an unstoppable enemy reached them. And when the Zereth fleet finally arrived, the New Dawn would probably suffer the same fate as every other ship that had faced them. Their engines would die, their systems would fail, and they would drift helplessly in space while the enemy took another world without firing a shot. But they had to try. Even if they could only save 500 people, those lives mattered. Even if the New Dawn was just one small cargo ship against an empire that had conquered dozens of worlds, they had a job to do. Jake settled back into his captain's chair and watched the stars stream past as they jumped to faster-than-light speed. In 4 days they would reach Haven Colony. In less than a week, they might face an enemy that no one had ever successfully fought. He just hoped they would be ready for whatever was coming. The New Dawn dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Haven Colony system. What Jake Morrison saw through his ship's view screen made his heart sink. Hundreds of ships filled the space around Haven Colony's main planet, but they were not moving in the organized patterns of a normal evacuation. Instead, they drifted in confused clusters, many of them dark and apparently powerless. Amy, try to contact Haven Colony Control, Jake ordered. Amy Rodriguez worked at her communication panel for several minutes. I'm getting responses, Captain. But they're weak and broken up. It sounds like they're having major technical problems down there. Lisa Carter looked up from her navigation station. Captain, I'm reading massive power fluctuations from at least half the ships in this system. Some of them look like they've lost main power completely. Jake frowned. This was not what he had expected to find. The Zereth fleet was still days away, according to their last intelligence reports. So why were ships already experiencing the kind of technical failures that usually happened when the Zereth arrived? Pete, run a full diagnostic on our systems, Jake said. I want to know if we're having any problems. The engineer nodded and began checking their ship's status. As he worked, Jake watched the chaos around Haven Colony. Transport ships were trying to dock with the orbital stations, but many of them seemed to be having trouble with their docking. Computers. Some vessels were spinning slowly, as if their attitude control systems had failed. This is Haven Colony control to all vessels, a voice crackled over their communication system. We are experiencing system-wide technical difficulties. All ships are advised to maintain safe distances and prepare for possible emergency procedures. Jake grabbed his communication microphone. Haven Colony Control, this is Captain Morrison of the cargo vessel New Dawn. We're here for evacuation duty. What's your status? New Dawn, we're glad to hear from you. Most of our evacuation fleet is experiencing power problems and computer malfunctions. We've had to delay the evacuation schedule until we can figure out what's causing these failures. Jake listened to the report from Haven Colony. He noticed something strange. Other ship captains were calling in with similar problems. Navigation computers crashing. Engine control systems failing. Communication arrays going offline. But the New Dawn seemed to be working perfectly. Captain, Pete said, looking up from his diagnostic screen. Our systems are running normally. All power levels are stable. I'm not detecting any of the problems the other ships are reporting. This was puzzling. If some kind of technical plague was affecting the evacuation fleet, why was the New Dawn immune? Jake had Pete run the diagnostic 3 more times, but the results were the same. Their old cargo ship was working fine while newer, more advanced vessels were having serious problems. New Dawn, this is the passenger liner Star Bright, a voice called over the radio. We've lost our main computer core and our engines are running at only 30% power. Can you assist with evacuation of our passengers? Jake looked at his crew. The Star Bright was a luxury liner that normally carried 2,000 passengers. If their systems were failing, those people were in serious danger. We'll help however we can, Jake replied. Prepare to transfer passengers to our cargo holds. For the next 6 hours, the New Dawn worked non-stop to help rescue people from disabled ships. Their cargo bays were soon packed with frightened evacuees. Men, women, and children huddled together, grateful to be on a ship that still had reliable life support and artificial gravity. During one of these rescue operations, they picked up a passenger who would change everything. Dr. Helen Brooks had been aboard a research vessel that lost power completely. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but when Jake met her, he could tell she was extremely intelligent. Dr. Brooks, Jake said as they helped her aboard, what kind of research were you doing? I study alien technology, she replied. Specifically, I've been analyzing artifacts recovered from worlds conquered by the Zereth Empire. Jake's attention sharpened. What have you learned? Dr. Brooks looked around the New Dawn's cargo bay, which was filled with evacuees from the disabled ships. Captain, could we talk privately? What I have to tell you is important, and it might explain what's happening to the evacuation fleet. Jake led Dr. Brooks to his small cabin behind the bridge. Pete, Lisa, and Amy joined them. The doctor looked exhausted, but her voice was steady as she began to explain what she had discovered. The Zereth don't use weapons in the way we understand them, she said. Their ships emit some kind of field that interferes with quantum-level interactions in electronic devices. It's not just jamming or electromagnetic interference. They're actually changing the local laws of physics to make advanced technology impossible. That sounds impossible, Pete said. I thought so too, until I started studying the evidence. Every ship that encounters the Zereth reports the same thing. First, their most advanced systems fail. Quantum computers, gravitic drives, artificial intelligence cores. Then the failures cascade down to the simpler systems until only the most basic mechanical devices continue to work. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Dr. Brooks, are you saying the Zereth are already affecting this system? Is that why the evacuation fleet is having problems? I believe so, she replied. The field they generate seems to have a very long range. They might still be days away, but their influence is already reaching us. Lisa spoke up, but our ship is working fine. Why aren't we affected? Dr. Brooks looked around at the New Dawn's simple, functional interior. How old is this ship? About 30 years, Jake replied. And what kind of systems does it use? Pete answered. Basic fusion engines, simple computer cores, mechanical control systems, nothing fancy. We always joked that this ship was built like a tank. Dr. Brooks smiled for the first time since coming aboard. That might be exactly why you're still functional. The New Dawn uses technology that's simple enough to operate below the Xerath suppression threshold. Your ship might be one of the few vessels in this system that can still fight. The implications of this hit Jake like a physical blow. If Dr. Brooks was right, then the New Dawn might be the only ship in the Haven Colony system that could remain operational when the Xerath fleet arrived. All the modern warships, with their advanced computers and sophisticated weapon systems, would be helpless. Doctor, Jake said carefully, are you telling me that our old cargo ship might be the only thing standing between Haven Colony and the Xerath Empire? I'm afraid that might be exactly what I'm telling you. Over the next 2 days, the situation in the Haven Colony system grew worse. More ships lost power completely and had to be abandoned. The evacuation effort slowed to a crawl as the few remaining functional vessels tried to rescue millions of people. Panic began to spread among the civilian population as word leaked out that the Xerath fleet was approaching faster than expected. Jake pushed his crew hard, working around the clock to ferry evacuees to safety. The New Dawn made trip after trip, loading refugees into every available space. But they could only carry so many people, and time was running out. During one of their runs, Amy picked up a long-range sensor contact. Captain, I'm detecting multiple large objects approaching the system. They're still at extreme range, but their energy signatures don't match any known ship designs. Jake felt his stomach tighten. How long until they arrive? At their current speed, less than 18 hours. Jake looked around at his crew. Pete was exhausted from constantly monitoring their systems. Lisa had been plotting evacuation routes for 2 days straight. Amy had been coordinating with dozens of other ships, trying to organize the chaotic rescue effort. Dr. Brooks, Jake said, is there anything else you can tell us about how the Xerath suppression field works? The scientist thought for a moment. There might be a way to protect other ships temporarily. If we could use the New Dawn as some kind of focal point, we might be able to create a small area where other vessels could function normally. How would that work? I'm not entirely sure. It would be extremely dangerous and we'd only have one chance to try it. Jake nodded slowly. The Xerath fleet would arrive soon, and when it did, the New Dawn would probably be the only ship in the system still capable of fighting. It was a terrifying responsibility, but someone had to make a stand. He looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in that darkness an unstoppable enemy was approaching. For the first time in their conquest, the Xerath would face a ship that refused to go quietly into the night. The New Dawn might be old, simple, and outgunned, but it was still flying. And as long as it could fly, Jake Morrison would not surrender. The alarm bells on the New Dawn began ringing at 0400 ship time. Jake Morrison jerked awake in his captain's chair, where he had been trying to catch a few hours of rest. Amy Rodriguez was at her communication station, her face pale in the glow of the emergency displays. Captain, they're here, she said quietly. 5 massive ships just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Jake rubbed his eyes and looked at the main screen. Even at maximum magnification, the Xerath ships looked more like moving shadows than solid objects. They were enormous, each one easily 10 times the size of the largest human battleship. He watched. They began moving toward Haven Colony with the slow, confident pace of predators who had never met real resistance. What's the status of the evacuation fleet? Jake asked. Lisa Carter checked her sensors. Most of the ships are completely dead now, Captain. Only about a dozen vessels are still showing any power readings, and those are failing fast. Jake could see the evidence of the Zereth suppression field's growing strength all around them. Ships that had been limping along with partial power were now drifting dark and silent. The few evacuation vessels that were still functional were reporting system failures across all their major components, but the New Dawn continued to operate normally. Her old fusion engines hummed steadily. Her basic computer systems responded to commands. Her simple mechanical controls worked exactly as they had been designed to work 30 years ago. "Pete," Jake called to his engineer, "how much firepower do we have?" Pete Collins looked up from his station with a grim expression. "Not much, Captain. We've got the mining lasers we use for asteroid work, and I've been modifying the cargo manipulators to work as weapons. But we're a cargo ship, not a warship. Can you make them effective against those Zereth ships?" "I can try. The mining lasers have decent range and power. The cargo manipulators are designed to move heavy objects, so they might be able to damage smaller targets, but Captain, those Zereth ships are huge. Our weapons are like throwing rocks at a mountain." Jake nodded. He had not expected to win a fair fight against 5 enemy dreadnoughts, but maybe they did not need to win. Maybe they just needed to show the galaxy that the Zereth could be fought. "Dr. Brooks," Jake said, turning to the scientist who had been working frantically at a portable computer, "what about that plan to protect other ships?" Helen Brooks looked up with tired but determined eyes. "I think I've figured out how to do it, but it's going to be very dangerous. We would need to position the New Dawn between the Zereth ships and our disabled fleet. Then we'd have to overload our power systems to create a kind of interference field. What are the risks? The power overload could destroy our ship. And even if it works, we'd only be able to protect a small area for a short time? Maybe long enough for a few other ships to restart their systems and fight back." Jake considered this. It was a desperate plan with little chance of success. But desperate times called for desperate measures. "Amy, open a channel to all ships in the system," Jake ordered. When the communication link was established, Jake spoke into his microphone. His voice was calm and steady, even though his heart was pounding. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the cargo vessel New Dawn. The Zereth fleet has arrived, and most of our ships are disabled. However, we believe we may have found a way to temporarily restore power to some vessels. All ships that can still maneuver should move to coordinates that we're transmitting now. All disabled ships should prepare for possible system restart." "New Dawn," came a reply from one of the few remaining functional ships. "This is Captain Roberts of the frigate Defiance. Are you seriously planning to fight 5 Zereth dreadnoughts with a cargo ship?" Jake looked around at his crew. Pete was already working to weaponize their mining equipment. Lisa was plotting an intercept course with the approaching enemy fleet. Amy was coordinating with the other ships. Dr. Brooks was making final preparations for her experimental interference field. "Captain Roberts," Jake replied, "someone has to make a stand. If we don't fight back now, Haven Colony falls just like all the other worlds. At least this time, the galaxy will see that the Zereth can be resisted." As the New Dawn began moving toward the Zereth fleet, Jake felt a strange calm settle over him. For almost 2 years, the galaxy had watched in horror as world after world fell without a fight. Today, that would change. Today, a simple cargo ship would show everyone that resistance was possible. The Zereth ships continued their approach, broadcasting the same surrender demands they had used on dozens of other worlds. The mechanical voice that came over the communication channels was cold and emotionless. "Inhabitants of this system, you will surrender immediately. Lower your shields, power down your weapons, and prepare for occupation. Resistance is futile. Your technology cannot function in our presence." Jake grabbed his microphone. "Zereth ships, this is Captain Morrison of the human vessel New Dawn. We reject your demands. Leave this system immediately or face the consequences." There was a long pause. Then the mechanical voice returned, and for the first time it sounded slightly different, less certain. "Human vessel, you will comply. Your ship should be non-functional." "How are you still operating?" "We're still operating because we're too stubborn to quit," Jake replied. and we're going to keep operating until you leave or we're destroyed. The lead Zereth ship, larger than the others, began moving faster toward the new dawn. Jake could see weapon ports opening along its massive hull. For the first time in their conquest, the Zereth were preparing to use conventional weapons instead of relying solely on their suppression field. "All hands, prepare for combat," Jake announced over the ship's intercom. "This is not a drill. We are engaging the enemy." The battle began when the Zereth ship fired a beam of energy that lit up space. Like a second sun, the new dawn rolled hard to port, and the enemy beam missed by less than 100 meters. Jake felt the heat wash over their hull even at that distance. "Pete, return fire!" The new dawn's modified mining lasers lanced out toward the Zereth ship. The beam struck the alien vessel's hull and actually caused visible damage. Pieces of armor plating broke away and tumbled into space. For a moment, the entire system fell silent. The Zereth ship had been damaged. In over 2 years of conquest, no one had ever successfully fired back at the Zereth, let alone hurt one of their ships. "Impossible," came the mechanical voice over the communication channel. "Your weapons should not function. Your ship should be dead." "Well, we're not dead yet," Jake replied, "and we're just getting started." The new dawn maneuvered around the massive Zereth ship, using its superior speed and agility to avoid the enemy's heavy weapons. Pete's mining lasers continued to fire, carving lines of destruction across the alien hull. The cargo manipulators, redesigned as kinetic weapons, hurled chunks of debris at the enemy ship's weapon ports, but Jake knew they could not keep this up for long. The new dawn was taking damage from near misses, and the Zereth ship was beginning to adapt to their tactics. Worse, the other 4 enemy vessels were closing in to help destroy this unexpected resistance. "Dr. Brooks, are you ready with that interference field?" Jake called out. "Almost, Captain. I need 30 more seconds." "Lisa, get us between the disabled fleet and the Zereth ships." As the new dawn moved into position, Jake opened a channel to the entire system. "All ships, this is your moment. When we activate our interference field, you'll have a brief window when your systems might come back online. Use it." The largest Zereth ship fired again, and this time the beam clipped the new dawn's starboard side. Alarms rang throughout the ship as hull plating melted and atmosphere leaked into space. "Field is ready, Captain," Dr. Brooks announced. Jake took a deep breath. "Activate it." The new dawn's power system screamed as Dr. Brooks overloaded them, far beyond their design limits. Energy cascaded through the ship's hull, creating a visible aura around the vessel. And suddenly, all around them, the disabled ships of the evacuation fleet began to flicker back to life. One by one, their engines restarted. Their weapons came online. Their shields activated. For the first time since the Zereth had begun their conquest, they faced an organized resistance. "All ships," Jake broadcast. "This is our chance. Fight back." The space around Haven Colony erupted in weapons fire as dozens of human ships opened up on the Zereth fleet. The aliens, caught completely off guard by this unprecedented resistance, began to fall back in confusion, but Jake knew their victory was temporary. The interference field was burning out the New Dawn systems, and it would not last much longer. The battle around Haven Colony had been raging for 3 hours, and the New Dawn was dying. Smoke filled the corridors as damaged systems sparked and failed. The ship's hull had dozens of holes burned through it, and the crew was running on emergency life support. But Jake Morrison refused to give up. Even as his ship fell apart around him, he kept fighting. The mining lasers were still operational, and Pete Collins had somehow managed to keep the engines running despite the massive damage they had taken. "Captain," Lisa Carter called out from her navigation station, "the interference field is failing. I'm reading power fluctuations throughout the ship." Jake could see the evidence of this all around them. The human ships that had been fighting alongside them were beginning to lose power again. One by one, their engines were shutting down and their weapons were going dark. The Zereth suppression field was reasserting itself as the New Dawn systems burned out, but the damage had been done. In 3 hours of fighting, the combined human fleet had destroyed one of the 5 Zereth ships and badly damaged 2 others. It was the first time anyone had successfully fought back against the alien empire, and the entire galaxy was watching. "Amy, are you still broadcasting?" Jake asked. Amy Rodriguez nodded, blood running down her face from a head wound she had received. When a console exploded, "Yes, Captain. The signal is weak, but it's still going out. The whole galaxy is seeing this." That was important. Even if the New Dawn was destroyed, even if Haven Colony fell, the galaxy would know that the Zereth could be hurt. They would know that resistance was possible. "Captain," Pete called from the engineering station, "I'm reading massive power buildup from the lead Zereth ship. I think they're preparing something big." Jake looked at the main screen. The largest Zereth vessel, which had been hanging back during most of the battle, was now moving forward. Energy was building along its hull, creating patterns of light. That hurt to look at directly. "Dr. Brooks, what are they doing?" Jake asked. Helen Brooks looked up from her portable computer, where she had been monitoring the alien ship's energy patterns. "I think they're preparing to ram us, Captain. Their commander seems to have taken this battle personally." "Ram us? Look at their course. They're not trying to use their weapons anymore. They're coming straight at us at maximum speed." Jake studied the tactical display. Dr. Brooks was right. The massive Zereth ship was accelerating directly toward the New Dawn, its bow pointed like a spear at the human vessel. At their current speed, they would collide in less than 10 minutes. "Can we outrun them?" Jake asked. Pete shook his head. "Not with the damage we've taken. Our engines are running at maybe 40% power. The Zereth ship is 3 times our size, but it's also 3 times faster than us right now." Jake felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The Zereth commander had decided that the New Dawn represented something dangerous, a symbol of resistance that could not be allowed to survive. Rather than risk the human ship escaping to fight another day, the alien was willing to destroy his own vessel to ensure the New Dawn was eliminated. "All crew to escape pods," Jake ordered. "That's a direct order. Abandon ship immediately." "Captain, what about you?" Lisa asked. Jake looked around at his crew. Pete Collins, who had been his friend for 15 years. Lisa Carter, who could navigate through the most dangerous asteroid fields without breaking a sweat. Amy Rodriguez, who had kept them in contact with the outside world even as their ship was falling apart around them. Dr. Brooks, whose knowledge had made this entire battle possible. "Someone needs to stay with the ship," Jake said quietly. "Someone needs to make sure that Zereth commander doesn't change his mind at the last minute." "Captain, no," Pete said. "We're not leaving you." "Yes, you are. That's an order." Jake's voice was firm but not angry. "This battle isn't over. The galaxy needs to know what we learned here today. Dr. Brooks needs to get her research to the right people. You all have important work to do." Amy was crying now, but she was also moving toward the escape pod bay. "Captain, what should I tell them?" "What should I tell the galaxy about what happened here?" Jake thought for a moment. "Tell them that the Zereth can be beaten. Tell them that sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones. Tell them that humanity doesn't know how to surrender." One by one, his crew left the bridge. Pete was the last to go, gripping Jake's hand tightly before heading to the escape pods. "It's been an honor serving with you, Captain," Pete said. "The honor was mine," Jake replied. When he was alone on the bridge, Jake looked out at the approaching Zereth ship. It filled the entire view screen now, its massive hull crackling with energy. He could see details on its surface that no human had ever seen before. Weapon ports, sensor arrays, what might have been viewing ports for the crew inside. Jake opened a communication channel to the Zereth ship. "This is Captain Morrison of the New Dawn. I know you can hear me." There was a pause, then the mechanical voice he had been hearing all day. But this time it sounded different, more personal. "Human Captain, I am War Prime Kethrock of the Zereth Empire. In 200 years of conquest, no species has ever maintained technological function in the presence of our suppression fields. Your resistance is an impossibility that threatens everything we understand about the universe." "Maybe that's your problem," Jake replied. "Maybe you understand less than you think you do. You have caused us to lose a ship and suffer damage. To two others. Thousands of Zereth warriors are dead because of your actions. This cannot be allowed to continue. Jake could see the escape pods from his ship moving away from the collision course. Good. His crew would survive to fight another day. War Prime Kethruk, Jake said, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that a cargo ship built by humans 30 years ago was able to hurt your fleet. Remember that we never surrendered, even when we were outnumbered 5-1. And remember that somewhere in this galaxy there are thousands of other ships just like mine? Your ship is unique, the alien commander replied. When it is destroyed, the anomaly will be eliminated. You're wrong, Jake said. We're not unique. We're just the first to stand up to you. But we won't be the last. The two ships were less than a minute from collision now. Jake could see individual details on the Zereth hull. He could see the alien crew preparing for impact. He could see the massive energy discharges that would destroy both vessels in a few seconds. Jake reached for the ship's intercom one last time. This is Captain Morrison to all human vessels. The New Dawn is about to be destroyed, but our mission is complete. We have shown the galaxy that the Zereth can be beaten. We have proven that resistance is possible. Continue the fight. Never surrender. The massive Zereth ship filled the entire view screen. Jake could see its commander on what must have been the bridge, a tall figure in dark armor staring back at him through the viewing ports. For Haven Colony, Jake whispered. For humanity, for everyone who refuses to give up. The collision when it came was brief and brilliant. The New Dawn, small and battered but still fighting, met the Zereth dreadnought head-on. Both ships disappeared in a ball of fire that lit up the entire system, but even as the explosion faded, the other Zereth ships were already retreating. For the first time in their history, they had been forced to withdraw from a battle. One of their commanders was dead, their fleet was damaged, and their aura of invincibility had been shattered. In the escape pods drifting through space. Pete Collins watched the explosion and wiped tears from his eyes. Goodbye, Captain, he whispered. Doctor. Brooks was already working on her portable computer, documenting everything they had learned. We have to get this information to the resistance movements, she said. We have to tell them what Jake Morrison and the New Dawn accomplished here today. The Battle of Haven Colony was over. The New Dawn was gone. But the war for galactic freedom had just begun. 6 months after the Battle of Haven Colony, Pete Collins stood on the bridge of his new ship and watched as the Liberation fleet approached Kepler Prime. The planet had been one of the first worlds to fall to the Zereth Empire, conquered without a fight when their advanced defense systems simply shut down. Today, that would change. Pete's ship was called the Jake Morrison, named after his old captain who had died ramming the Zereth flagship. Like the New Dawn, it was built using older, simpler technology that could resist the alien suppression fields. But unlike the New Dawn, the Jake Morrison was not alone. 43 other ships surrounded it, all of them designed with the same basic principles that had made Jake's last stand possible. Captain Collins, came a voice over the communication. System, this is Admiral Chun aboard the flagship Liberty. All ships report ready for the attack. Pete smiled at being called Captain. It still felt strange after 6 months, but he had learned to accept the responsibility. Dr. Helen Brooks had insisted that he take command of the new ship, saying that he understood better than anyone how to fight the Zereth using simple, reliable technology. Admiral, the Jake Morrison is ready, Pete replied. All systems are green. The Liberation fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of sleek, advanced warships with quantum computers and gravitic drives, these vessels looked like something from humanity's early space age. They used fusion engines, mechanical controls, and basic electronics that were considered primitive by modern standards, but that primitive technology was exactly what made them effective against the Zereth. Dr. Brooks had spent 6 months working with engineers across human space, designing ships that could operate below the alien suppression threshold. The results were not pretty or sophisticated, but they worked. All ships, this is Admiral Chun, begin the attack. The Liberation fleet moved toward Kepler Prime like a pack of wolves. The planet was defended by 3 Zereth ships, confident in their ability to shut down any attacking force before it could fire a shot. They had held this world for almost 2 years without facing any serious resistance. That was about to change. "Amy, open a channel to all ships," Pete ordered. Amy Rodriguez, now serving as the Jake Morrison's communication officer, nodded. She had survived the destruction of the New Dawn along with Pete, Lisa Carter, and Dr. Brooks. All of them had volunteered to serve on the new ship, determined to continue the fight that Jake Morrison had started. "Channel open, Captain," Amy said. "This is Captain Collins to all ships," Pete announced. "Remember what we learned at Haven Colony. The Zereth can be beaten if we work together. Stay focused, stay calm, and never give up." The first Zereth ship opened fire when the human fleet was still at long range. Their energy weapons lit up space, but the human ships were designed to take damage. Instead of trying to avoid the alien beams, they flew straight through them, accepting hits to their heavily armored hulls. "Direct hit on our starboard side," Lisa called out from her position at the navigation station. "Hull breach on Deck 3, but the damage control teams are already sealing it." Pete nodded. The Jake Morrison had been built to fight, not to run. Every system on the ship had backup systems, and every backup had another backup. It was the kind of engineering philosophy that had made the New Dawn so effective against the Zereth. "All weapons, fire at will," Pete ordered. The Liberation Fleet's weapons were as simple as the rest of their technology. Mining lasers, kinetic projectiles, and fusion warheads that had been designed for asteroid mining. But they worked, and they worked reliably. The Zereth ships found themselves under attack from weapons they could not shut down. The battle was different from Haven Colony in every way. Instead of one cargo ship making a desperate last stand, this was a coordinated assault by a fleet designed specifically to fight the Zereth. The alien ships, accustomed to easy victories, found themselves overwhelmed by an enemy they could not disable. "The lead Zereth ship is retreating," Amy reported. "They're broadcasting surrender terms." Pete felt a surge of satisfaction. The mighty Zereth Empire, which had conquered dozens of worlds without effort, was asking for surrender terms. It was a moment that would have made Jake Morrison proud. "Tell them we accept their surrender," Pete replied. "But only if they leave this system immediately and never return." As the Zereth ships retreated from Kepler Prime, Pete opened a communication channel to the planet below. For 2 years, the people of this world had lived under alien occupation. Today they were free. "People of Kepler Prime, this is Captain Collins of the Human Liberation Fleet. Your world is free. The Zereth occupation is over." The response from the planet was immediate and overwhelming. Voices filled the communication channels as millions of people celebrated their freedom. Cities that had been dark for years began lighting up as power was restored. Ships that had been grounded since the conquest began lifting off to join the Liberation Fleet. Dr. Brooks, who had been monitoring the battle from the Jake Morrison Science Station, looked up with tears in her eyes. "Captain, we're receiving reports from across the galaxy. Resistance movements on 17 conquered worlds have begun uprisings. They're using the tactics we developed here." Pete felt a deep sense of pride and sadness. Pride in what they had accomplished, and sadness that Jake Morrison was not here to see it. The captain who had refused to surrender at Haven Colony had started something that was spreading across the entire galaxy. Over the following weeks, the Liberation Fleet moved from system to system, freeing world after world from Zereth control. Each victory made the next one easier as more species learned that the aliens could be beaten. The empire that had seemed unstoppable just months ago was crumbling as rebellion spread through their territory. The Zereth, for their part, seemed unable to adapt to this new kind of warfare. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that their suppression fields made them invincible. When that assumption proved false, they had no backup plan. "Captain," Lisa said during one of their planning sessions, "I've been studying the pattern of Zereth retreats. They're falling back toward the center of their empire, abandoning the outer worlds completely." Pete studied the tactical maps spread across the table in the Jake Morrison's briefing room. Dr. Brooks was there too, along with Amy and several other officers from the Liberation Fleet. "What do you think they're planning?" Pete asked. Dr. Brooks spoke up. "I believe they're regrouping for a final stand. The Zirith have never faced a serious challenge to their empire before. They don't know how to handle sustained resistance. So what do? We keep pushing," Amy said. "Every world we free makes us stronger and makes them weaker. Eventually, we'll have enough ships to challenge their home systems." Pete nodded. It was a long-term strategy, but it was working. The galaxy was waking up to the fact that the Zirith were not gods, just another species with advanced technology. And technology, no matter how advanced, could be overcome by determination and clever tactics. Months passed, and the liberation movement continued to grow. The Jake Morrison became famous throughout human space as the ship that had carried on the legacy of the New Dawn. Pete found himself giving speeches to packed auditoriums, telling the story of Jake Morrison's last stand and inspiring a new generation of fighters. But the most important victory was not military. It was the change in how people thought about the Zirith Empire. The aliens were no longer seen as unstoppable forces of nature. They were just another enemy that could be defeated if people had the courage to stand up and fight. Dr. Brooks established the Galactic Resistance Technology Division, teaching other species how to build ships that could resist Zirith suppression fields. The techniques developed aboard the New Dawn spread throughout the galaxy, giving every world the tools they needed to defend themselves. 1 year after the Battle of Haven Colony, Pete stood on the observation deck of the Jake Morrison and looked out at a liberated galaxy. Hundreds of worlds that had been under alien occupation were now free. The Zirith Empire, which had once seemed destined to conquer everything, was reduced to a handful of core systems. "Captain," Amy said, joining him at the observation window, "we're receiving a priority message from Earth. They want to give you a medal for your service in the Liberation campaign." Pete shook his head. "The medal should go to Jake Morrison. He's the one who showed us that the Zirith could be beaten." "The medal is for continuing his work," Amy replied, "for refusing to let his sacrifice be meaningless." Pete thought about his old captain, dead for over a year but not forgotten. Jake Morrison had commanded a simple cargo ship with a crew of 4 people. But his refusal to surrender had changed the course of galactic history. The New Dawn was gone, destroyed in the collision that killed Warprime Kethruck, but its legacy lived on in every ship that fought back, every world that refused to surrender, and every being in the galaxy who learned that sometimes standing firm against impossible odds was all it took to win. The Zirith had taken worlds without effort until a human vessel stood firm. Now the galaxy knew that no enemy, no matter how powerful, was truly unstoppable. All it took was the courage to fight back.